Today we have Graham Russell, the CEO of HSC Technologies, which is a listed company on the Australian Stock Exchange, and that has been in operation for just 3 years. And in that 3 years has achieved over 10,000 clients in the area of providing support around technologies in the aged care home and in the private home. We're going to discuss with Graham why the area of sensors and the collection of data and analytics has finally come of age and is delivering real benefits for aged care operators. How do you do, Graham? Welcome to Saturday and DCM.
Thanks very much, Chris. It's great to be invited. Thanks very much for the opportunity. Started my career, I actually have a background in electronics and did a lot of stuff in security, doing banks, prisons, hospitals, IVF and so forth. And these are like aged care, very, very critical infrastructure. If you make mistakes and issues happen, you go to jail, people die. So I saw that how I could actually come to this sector and help improve aged care and utilize some of this enterprise sensors and platforms to help collect information and improve what we were currently doing in aged care.
Graham, can you explain to us what HSC brings to an aged care operator in the area of sensors such that you have had such a fast and rapid take-up by clients?
I think is that we stepped back from it and actually not looking at the sensors, Chris. What we really wanted to do is that what are the problems? And we talk about our 5 major challenges of the aged care industry. Number 1, compliance. Everyone gets it. But that is a really big issue for the executives, is that how do we ensure compliance? And as I mentioned with my background, prisons, hospitals, banks, compliance is a must. And in this situation is that we've covered off compliance. We're also looking at staff engagement. We know it's at an all-time low, but how do we do more with less? So we've got this situation is that compliance is increasing, staff engagement's lowering, and skill set's lowering. So something's got to give. So what we have done is created a way is that we're putting sensors in that increase compliance, that also then support staff. So if something gets missed, it doesn't get missed. And we cover up and we also get that sorted out. The piece from this though is that how it autonomously does it. And so to give you an example, and it's the best way to communicate it, is I wanted to show you this sensor, the sleep sensor. So this is a sensor that replaces bed mats. So I personally have sold enormous amount of bed mats to aged care providers over the last 20 years and made a lot of money out of it. The thing is though, is that bed mats are no dignity for the resident. Nurses hate them because they false alarm all the time. They break down every year. There's infection control and so forth and so forth. This sensor is at the same price and it replaces a bed mat. It goes under the leg of one bed with a ramp, okay? What that does, it now monitors in bed and out of bed. It also uses a new technology that monitors heart rate and breath rate. It monitors movement at the level of the bed, so we monitor bed sores. It also, when you get out of the bed, it will turn on the night light for the ensuite. When you get back into bed, it will turn off the light. So what is the value of that sensor? Well, one is that I now have 12 hours of data on the quality of sleep, how well they've slept, their heart rate and breath rate. I don't need to do staff rounding. So now staff are more engaged because they're not doing menial tasks. They're not disrupting residents' sleep every 3 hours. And we've got full data for a level of compliance. And this sensor is the same price as a bed mat and lasts around 5 to 7 years. So that's an example, I suppose, of how a sensor can increase compliance, improve staff engagement. Thirdly, improve the environment for the resident. And fourth, we've actually got some data that we can show to family members that they are actually being cared for and looked after.
Do you have a financial return for that $250 investment?
Absolutely, and it's been one of the bigger challenges is that there's a lot of sensors and there's a lot of ideas that, improve an environment for someone. But for this to be successful, and I think a part of why we have been successful is that we've been able to provide a guaranteed return on investment. So for example, is that we've got some providers now that are using the sleep sense, just this one sensor, who have gone from example of having 5 staff on a night shift for a 100-bed facility, 1 RN, 4 carers, doing 3-hour welfare checks. We've been able to move this site to having 1 RN and 2 carers at night. Now, what they have done is not just taken the full saving. They've moved 1 staff member to the morning shift, which is obviously the busiest. Obviously feeding, changing, breakfast and all of the above. So they've moved an extra staff member to the morning shift and they've pocketed the saving of that 1 shift. So that $3,500 saving per week more than pays for this and the entire Talius solution and all of its sensors. So that's just a way that we guarantee an ROI for obviously implementation.
In our discussions, we've mentioned the importance of the duty of care. Can you explain how, for our audience, how the sensors can cover the responsibility for duty of care?
Okay, well, yet again, stepping back and looking at what the challenges are, and obviously duty of care is quite a big word. But that really refers back to is that we have a compliance issue. So when something is complained about. So an example would be is that we had a site with a resident who was left on a toilet for 3 hours, has severe pressure sores and has been reported to the tribunal. So the situation for this provider is that they now have a court proceedings. They've got legal representation. This CEO doesn't know who the resident was and has no information, has gone to the general manager who has no information, has gone to the director of nursing who has no information, has gone to the RN, and the RN says, oh, it was a temp staff that was on that shift and we'll have to wait before we can contact them. In this example of an investigation, this client said is that they had approximately nearly 100 hours of labour doing the investigation. They still have no data. Currently, the only data that is actually in an aged care home now is when someone pressed the nurse call button and how long it took to someone to respond. That's it. With the Talius platform, we obviously still have the same alert button and response, but we're monitoring sleep. We're monitoring as the resident had meals, showers, toilet, activity, step count, and all of the above. And this information is autonomously collected from our sensors and profiles are created. And this then creates a situation is that we actually, our partnership with CSIRO and our algorithms is that we actually then detect any deviations. So an example of that is that this is the big part, Chris, is that I can go to most providers and say, has this resident had breakfast? I'm not sure. Have they had a shower today? Possibly. Have they been out of their room? Not really sure. And this is the challenge is that we've got 3 shifts per day, multiple staff, moving with temp staff and so forth, is that information has only been manually collected through to-do lists into patient management systems. We bring this data into those patient management systems and create proactive alerts. So for example, is that, Chris, Mrs. Baines hasn't come for breakfast this morning and she is sitting in the common room. Mrs. Baines last night normally sleeps for 9 hours, but last night she slept for 6 and she got out of bed 4 times. This preemptive data is now presented in a way that gives people more information of what's actually happening.
You've used the expression managed by exception. So I assume that example where Mrs. Baines has only had 6 hours sleep versus 9. So that raises an alert. Is that your thinking?
No, that's a really good point, Chris, is that we're going from one end where we have no information to the Talius where we have so much information. And what we do is actually an aggregation of profile. So the aggregation of the data is what is valuable. So we don't just monitor that Mrs. Baines only slept for 6 hours. We know so her step count has gone from 3,500 steps to 1,400. We also know that she hasn't been out of her room today and she's only been to the toilet once. So as you say, it is then managed by exception because that is one of the very important pieces of some sensors systems that are what we call a consumer grade. For example, as some systems will tell you every time that mum goes out of home. Within a week, you're going to get notification fatigue. The first day it's fantastic, isn't this brilliant? A week later it's like, oh, whatever. You want to know when mum doesn't come home. And that's the difference for how data is actually used. So managing by exception, not creating more work for the workforce, for the teams, and creating manage by exception of who actually needs the assistance.
So a difference between yourself and, say, other providers of sensors is that you have the AI has been developed to be able to take that data and interpret it.
Probably two parts, Chris, is there's a lot of sensors out there that work what I classify in silos. So you might have a great sensor that monitors sleep, and you might have a great sensor that monitors a fall, or you might have a sensor that monitors social interaction. When they're all taken in isolation, it's not valuable. It's when you aggregate the data. And I use an example. It's not exact, but it's an example of, if I'm sure a lot of the executives in Saturday will understand, is that 10 years ago we had a Nokia or a BlackBerry, and we had a Navman, and we had a digital camera, and we had a Palm Pilot, we had an MP3 player. They all worked in isolation, and none of them worked together until Steve Jobs came along and put it all in one device. That's what Talius does. It brings all the sensors in. And the thing is that we sell a lot of the sensors, Chris, and we believe is that we have partnerships with Essence from Israel, and we've got sensors from Canada. We do search the world for the best sensors, but we are sensor agnostic. So we actually bring in people's existing nurse call systems. Like, they've already made an investment. This is not about replacing stuff. It's about bringing what you currently have.
There were three things that you would be saying to a prospective client they should be thinking about when considering the technology that goes into an aged care individual room and into the overall facility in the area of resident support. What would be the three things that they should be thinking of?
Well, I think, in highlight of where we are now, it's obviously staff engagement and retention. I can't see how we're going to fix this problem. Currently with, migration restrictions, there's so many challenges in that space, is that providers are going to have to show how they can differentiate from, like, if you were a carer now, you could choose wherever you wanted to work. If you come to this side, is that there's some sensors here that we're going to support you. You don't have to do menial tasks and spend 30% of your time doing note taking. We're automatically collecting the notes when you work here. You don't have to do staff rounding because we're monitoring our residents all the time. You're not going to have to disrupt their sleep, so they're going to be better rested and not as cranky tomorrow. And if you accidentally forget something, like you put Mrs. Smith on the toilet and you forgot to come back and grab her, we'll send you an alert. And when that medication management, when you haven't given, Bill his medication by 10 a.m., we'll create an alert. And when Bill goes to go out through the door accidentally through, dementia wandering, we're going to create an alert. So these sensors are going to support you. Like anyone in any profession, is that you choose the environment and you choose the culture, and this improves all of those bits. Correspondingly, on the other side of it, who is the client? And often in cases, it's a family member. Chris, if you and I are choosing someone, where do we want to go to put our mum? Everyone says they're the best. We've got the best nurses, we're the best carers, we're not for profit, we're small, we're big, whatever. The Royal Commission has clearly stated that no one's doing a great job. We need to really clearly show to the family members that how we're doing it. And we're going to send you an alert that your mum's up. We're going to show you that carers have been into the room. This is, it is Big Brother, but actually the data improves the dignity for the resident. We can now shut a door, improve the safety, create a room in a home environment, but have the sensors to give us the information that we know that they're okay. The bit that I'd like to, to really conclude on though, Chris, is that this is exactly the same as your smartphone. You start small. Once you have a Talius operating system, you can put one sensor in and improve efficiency. You put the next sensor in. Now, if you look at 10 years later, you'll be blown away by how many apps you have. You probably started with one sensor, and now you've got 50. This is the journey and inevitable for where we're heading.
Graham, we also need to address compliance, don't we?
This also protects the executive team in the sense is that it gives them full visibility of all of their villages, of all of their facilities at the touch of a button, of knowing when a resident has not eaten, has dementia wandering or anything like that. So you have full audit trail of compliance of everything that happened for the resident, every interaction with the staff members, and even every interaction with them, all the way down to has the room been cleaned properly. Like there's a huge amount of data that can be provided to give that compliance, and it can be all proactive. So when the spot checks and audits come through, is that they're quite overwhelmed by the amount of information that can be provided.
Graham, could you give our audience an idea of the investment for an aged care home?
Chris, for a traditional nurse call system, you're looking at around about that $4,500 to $5,000 per bed, per room. The HSC Talius full suite platform with the data and the algorithms and all of the audit trail and profiling, you're looking at a comparative cost. But in saying that is that we have a number of clients that have started off, they can just start the journey and anywhere from down to $1,000 a room.
Graham, summing up, what are the three things that our audience should take away?
If you install Talius, the impact and the savings to your workforce, to your team and your culture will be dramatic. Secondly to that is that the data that you will use to improve compliance and audit and business operational efficiencies and improvement will be dramatic. And lastly to that is that we will significantly improve the environment for the residents and the peace of mind for families.